Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Just one moment, please, while I turn off the waiting room so that everyone can join us. Okay, so let's make a start. Thank you all very much for joining us for this event today on accountability in the digital age, the role of OSINT in international criminal investigations. My name is Adiba. I am the president of the Association of Young International Criminal Lawyers, and I would like to thank you all for joining us this evening. So for those of you who are less familiar with us, the association is a global network of over 300 early career and emerging practitioners and scholars working across international criminal law and related fields in more than 45 countries. Events like today's are at the heart of what we do. We bring together practitioners, academics, as well as the next generation of international criminal lawyers to engage with the questions that are shaping the future of our field. And of course, few questions are more pressing than the one that we are gathering to discuss tonight. Over the past decade, the use of technology, AI, and open source intelligence, or OSINT for short, has changed and transformed the investigation and prosecution of international crimes, especially when it comes to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. What once required on the ground access, eyewitness testimony, and state cooperation can now be facilitated through satellites, social media scraping, geolocation analysis, and digital footprints in conflict zones. Digital documentation has gained major relevance in recent conflicts, for example, in Syria, Ukraine, and Myanmar, where vast amounts of online evidence have been collected by civil society organizations and other people on the ground. International courts and tribunals, including the ICC, now increasingly admit digital materials such as videos and satellite imagery as proof of international crimes. And while witnesses remain central to atrocity trials, digital evidence gathered through OSINT is frequently. Oh, apologies. Are you able to hear me better now? Okay. So while witnesses remain central to atrocity trials, digital evidence gathered through OSINT is frequently used to corroborate other types of evidence. But that power comes with hard questions, such as, so how do we verify what we are seeing? How do we guard against manipulation? What are the ethics of using someone's data, etc., etc.? But today we have two speakers who are very well placed to take us through these difficult questions. I am very pleased and exceptionally grateful to our two speakers today. First, we have Mr. Nikolas Katsimpras. He is a conflict analyst and strategy consultant whose work centers on the Eastern Mediterranean and the MENA region. He is a lecturer at Columbia University. And in recent years, his focus has shifted specifically towards the use of open source intelligence in conflict analysis, from building OSINT teams to developing custom AI-powered analytical tools and designing interactive training challenges for skills assessment. He has for many years taught in the dispute resolution program at CUNY's John Jay College of Criminal Justice and has been a lecturer in negotiation and conflict resolution, as I mentioned, at Columbia University since 2014. He is a former senior fellow of the Hellenic American Leadership Council, an Atlantic Council Millennium Fellow alumni, and a former officer of the Hellenic Navy. He is, as you can tell, very well accomplished, and we are incredibly grateful to be hearing from him today. Our second speaker is our very own Professor Michael T. Tiu Jr. He is an assistant professor at the University of Philippines, where he also heads the International Criminal Law Program of the university's Institute of International Legal Studies and the University of Philippines Law Center's Information and Publication Division. He is a legal consultant with the UN Office on Drugs and Crime under the UN Joint Program for the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights in the Philippines, and consults and consults for the Philippine Supreme Court on gender policy and for the Commission on Human Rights on international human rights standards. He is also a member of the Philippine Working Group on Business and Human Rights and holds a Juris Doctor from the University of the Philippines, an LLM in International Business Law from Central European University, and has attended the Hague Academy's International Law Winter Session. He is also a member of the association's programs committee, and we are also very grateful to him for dedicating his time and his expertise for this event today. We are now going to move on to hearing a presentation from each speaker, followed by an open Q&A. So please do note down any questions that you have. And with that, I will hand over to our first speaker, Mr. Nikolas Katsimpras. You have the floor.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Adiba. I appreciate it. And thank you for the invitation. Let me share my screen really quick. Okay, can you see the slides? Okay, great. So first of all, I want to a little bit give an introduction about what our viewers can, your members can expect. And I think that's important because especially what I have come across over the past 15 years of my career is that insights, at least for me, have been more valuable when they come from something that is outside my, let's call it bubble. Something that, I've had breakthroughs professionally when I've been exposed to people tackling similar problems like me from different areas. So what I've tried to do here in my introductory speech is essentially to share some more like the journey of OSINT for me and some more of the, the general fundamentals that I think are important in terms of what is the potential actual spirit that someone needs to have to be able to engage, regardless if they are a lawyer, regardless if they are in any kind of field. And honestly, the most important thing for me now is how AI has been completely changing everything that we do. However, if someone is not good in embracing and the basics and investing time in making sure that they can do things the way they should be done, AI becomes then a problem because it just accelerates, immediate and instant gratification, and people cannot really engage with the fundamentals in a productive way. So I want to show you a little bit some of the more basics that I think are important to even align our terminology of what we'll be talking about. So first of all, what is open source intelligence? Some fields, including this one, is not a set field. It's if you have this discussion in 10 different programs and 10 different universities, you have a very different approach depending on how people have been using it. However, the common denominator is the most basic thing, which is any kind of intelligence. And again, the transition from data to intelligence, that is a very critical component to be analyzed. But any kind of data can be found online through legal ways, open source ways and sources. And then insights being extracted based on the dots connected between those data. That is the transition from open source data to the intelligence part. However, how this is done, it might be simple, but at the same time, it requires a sense of, a lot of practice to be able to develop the spirit that is needed. So let's talk a bit about why. Why is this important? Now, for most of the past decade, how I have benefited and how I landed in OSINT, and I changed my whole even teaching to focus more on OSINT was the following. The three basics of analyzing any conflict, very simple questions, is who was engaged in this landscape I'm trying to understand. what really happened and why. However, the challenge that exists is what happens if you're working on a case, any case, a problem, your criminal cases, when there's no literature, you don't have access, direct access to information, and essentially, what is your added value, or what is your preparation? What does your preparation look like when you neglect the criminal battlefield that is online potentially? Like, how can you actually focus only on aspects of the work that are more still part of academic programs, but a lot of the academic programs, from my experience, and this is a struggle that we have at my university as well, haven't really embraced the huge fundamental changes that have been taking place with analyzing information that is online. They are more academic and like practitioner focused, and this is a struggle that we face in many programs. Me personally, I'm not an academic, I'm a practitioner. And essentially, my course, the latest version that we just approved by the committee at my program, is specifically about the use of OSINT and AI in analyzing modern conflicts. The conflicts that I'm focused mostly are political conflicts. However, in my program, we have other expertise and professors who are focusing more close to the conflicts that you hinted earlier, Adiba. So the first, like this is when we're doing a stakeholder analysis, the first thing that we do is we focus on overt stakeholders, meaning stakeholders who are part of any case that we're trying to study. And the challenge that exists, and we had a lot of struggle, like as a conflict analysis and resolution communities, how can we transition from the overt to the covert ones? And this is where the added value of OSINT has has been dramatic in terms of practitioners embracing it. However, we're talking about lawyers and it's young lawyers in this group. However, our professional journey is winding. At least mine has been very winding. So I want to give examples and also demonstrate a little bit, like ping a little bit, people's perspective about the OSINT field and how it relates to a very wide range of fields. And the reason for that is you might be a lawyer now. I don't know if you will be a lawyer tomorrow. Like nowadays, especially young generations, they evolve their expectations, and the professional route that you chose earlier on is not necessarily the one you'll be 10 years later as you come more into, maturing and realize what you really need and to be fulfilled. However, I want to show you like that OSINT, in my experience, transcends a wide range of fields and give you example for different ones so that maybe you can make inferences that are valuable and extrapolate something more relevant to you. So for my experience, especially working in DC, most of my professional work is in Washington, DC, working with embassies, with law firms, with lobbying firms, and some VC investment firms, is that OSINT is also part of the due diligence culture, meaning if you want to do anything in policy, business, venture capital firms, law firms, BDHR, even PR firms, OSINT is essentially part of a much bigger due diligence culture that any kind of modern practitioner needs to develop, essentially, especially given how AI is making verification, which you mentioned earlier, Adiba, so much more challenging. Now, as any practitioner starts going down the rabbit hole, there are specific criteria that I think define a good open source researcher, a good person who's able to pick a case that they need to dive into, understand which angle might be more interesting and worth investing time into it, and at the same time being able to extract the right insights. And the most important thing for me is finding people who combine all those characteristics, but at the same time being good team players. So in the teams that I'm building, I'm looking for these very specific personality traits, which are not easy to find altogether. One is intrinsic curiosity, creativity about coming up with angles of the investigation or combining things in a different way that someone else combined earlier before. Sharp attention to details. Also, you need to be obsessed and have stamina. information retention, because something that you uncovered in an open source investigation like a month ago, 6 months ago, might be connected to something that you find tomorrow. And that pattern is the valuable part for generating intelligence. And then synthesis and pattern recognition, being confident, but at the same time being not just open, but welcoming other people's constructive feedback about your confirmations of how you combine data to make sure that you stay humble and not make mistakes. And then at the end of the day, how can you combine all that in good storytelling? Especially remember when I used to teach at John Jay, storytelling is a big part, even in courts, but also in my experience, in any aspect of all of those examples I gave earlier, from policy to the courts to business. What is the story that you want to be told based on the information you found? And most importantly, what is the story that your audience can actually appreciate and it can resonate? So I want to show you a case, an unexpected success OSINT case that I use often because it's not the usual one to use in an OSINT discussion, and people are not really aware of it. But it's the perfect example for me of OSINT used in a traditional setting, in a new innovative way, producing actually a lot of an immediate result and a lot of profit for the people who use it. So almost 10 years ago, like 8 years ago, there was this investment firm in New York called Quintessential. And what they did is they formed something that was very innovative at the time. They formed an open source and OSINT investigative team, and they start looking into companies that are publicly traded, try to find someone who's lying. Their main goal was to essentially find the liar who was violating the law, short the stock in advance, meaning bet against the stock, release their investigation, and make money out of the stock essentially collapsing and the criminal charges that are filed. In this specific case, they found this Greek company in the Greek, and that's why it's safe for me to use. I'm Greek, so it's interesting how they picked this specific case. They found a Greek luxury, supposedly company called Foli, who was lying about their sales, especially in Asia and the points of sales. They were really inflating all their numbers, and they were publicly traded in the Greek stock market. So they did this long investigation. I will talk very briefly about it. But when they published the paper, no one was aware of what was going on. And in this paper, what they said is that we have information completely based on OSINT information. And then after the OSINT, they just made some calls. For example, they saw that even though this company was claiming in the publicly filed statements to the authorities that they were, hundreds of millions of dollars sales in Asia, they saw that in the web rankings, their website in Asia was very, very low. So it didn't have much visitor traffic. Those were very small, easy inferences that they start collecting to start investigating further. So they transition eventually to even making calls to all their stores to see if they're open. And they figure out that they were lying even about how many stores they had. Long story short, even though the case started in 2018, within a couple of years, the owners were arrested, the company was liquidated, and the company that used all this methodology was able to make approximately, the estimates are between $10 to $50 million. Now, why is this important? Because for me, this is a great case. If you follow up like their approach, if you follow the approach Bellingcat did, like this citizens group of OSINT investigating Russian assassination attempts in London, in other places 10 years ago, they were able all to disrupt what I would call like Danos, like that traditional, let's say, traditional fields, disrupt them in a way that no one expected. AI now, and this will be the leading towards the end, AI now takes this to the next level because it can really streamline what we do on an OSINT, everyday workflow. in ways that previously were really not imaginable by people like me. So what did this quintessential researcher team did? First of all, they had a hunch, and they were masters in inference. Why a hunch? Because if you want to do investigation in a company, you need to first decide where to invest resources and time so you don't waste time. So they didn't do an investigation in a company in the New York Stock Exchange. They picked the Greek one. Why? Because most likely, and they were right, that environment would be more, less oversight would be applied on the companies, and it would be a higher probability for them to hit their target. So they were very calculated with making the right inferences. And the goal at the end of the day of OSINT researchers is to collect the data, but the transition to intelligence, that is the inference and the targeted insights that we all need to demonstrate our added value. So the fundamentals of all of this comprise of three components. One is the craft of data collection. The second one is the art of logical reasoning to connect the dots. But lastly is the art of storytelling. In my experience, anyone who fails in one of these three fails in collectively being able to be a good sourcer, a good open source intelligence analyst. So what would this look like for individuals and professionals like you? First of all, any case for me should require a specific customized workflow that every day anyone should follow to make sure that they can monitor anything related to their case. What I have done over the past few years is try to operationalize research. Coming from a military background, the best way that I could come up with and what I'm using is we use what we call SOP, standard operating procedure, meaning we have a new case to analyze, a new conflict, a new client who is managing an issue. Okay, then we have new SOPs. And SOPs means that we come up with a hypothesis, we break it down to sources that contain possible information that we need. We use specific rolling keywords that we change and adapt as we get more familiar with the case. And we operationalize it. What to look in the morning, what to look in the afternoon, what to look in the evening, collect the information. And now with AI, I will show you towards the end, this can be done in a way that is super fast, super insightful, and it was never done before. So the daily data immersion for any case, I think for me is the bread and butter of any open source analyst. What this would look like in the beginning, again, like a very small infographic I put together just to show something that's more related to me, but you can infer and extrapolate for you is you need to start with defining the scope, who, what, why are you investigating something, focus on overt versus covert. And as you're transitioning during the day, you need to focus more on specific tools that can be found online, the social media mapping, general ways of combining keywords and automating this with AI to be able to track very specific, narrow issues while putting away all the noise that you don't care about. In my specific case, I follow a lot about political influence and funding. So to give you some examples, our methodology focuses about bills that are sponsored, hearings, voting records, finance records, how different donors are aligned with positions. And then we juxtapose that with the movement that we have of the conflict and try to connect the dots. Overall, out of, I would say, any kind of methodology I am familiar with about OSINT, there are some key, very simple, common threads between them. The first one, of course, has to do with verification, establishing a timeline. And then the two main things is what is out of pattern, red flags, and then what is, connect the dots between pattern. And as we try to collect on the information, we need to essentially develop a story that makes sense to whoever our audience is. By the way, data immersion, one metaphor I use with my analyst is I used to get 5,000 notifications a day from X, from different tools we use. It is extremely important for any kind of researcher to be able to go through the content and the data, but immediately figure out within seconds, then the more you do it, the better you get. What is trust? 80, 90% goes to the trust being the big one. what is good to look into maybe later, what is potentially medium or high value, but for later, it's not urgent, but essentially focus on the nuggets. So essentially we have tweets about the case we monitor, articles, different database results every single day. We need to go through them as we collect them and decide which part of the bucket they are. And once we find the gold nugget, we stop everything we do to focus on it. At the end of the day, we go back to the medium yellow bucket. This methodology now with AI is streamlined because we develop tools to do this for us. We use agents to do it. Daily, diligent data immersion is the prerequisite for accurate inference. Because if someone only develops and commits obsessively in collecting this data for 6 months, only then they can start really developing what in the university, one of my mentors calls systemic wisdom. Essentially is developing this capacity to understand how the system they're trying to understand is connecting the dynamics affecting it to the stakeholders. The more that someone immerses themselves in this methodology, the more educated they become in the system, and their hands, it's much more trained than any untrained user. Now, of course, it's very important to be very careful about accuracy of inferences. Essentially for me, I use a metaphor from the Navy. When we connect dots that we find, we need to be very specific about the confidence that we have in the data sources and the findings and try to go as close to raw data as possible. But then when we make the transition and the leap to connecting the dots and make inferences and insights, which is our added value based on our experience and expertise, then we need to be very explicit about our confidence in our inferences. In the Navy, if we detect a sub and we see it, we look at the sub, it's certainly a sub. We call it search sub. The lower confidence we have, maybe an echo, maybe less reliable data, we need to be explicit that maybe there's something there worth looking more into. So for me, any kind of inference needs to be accompanied by the degree of accuracy and the confidence that we have in the inferences and the data in order to make sure that we protect our credibility as researchers. Now, what I will show you, and I will focus a little bit on it, is how vibe coding has changed everything. And what do I mean by this? Vibe coding is the ability of any kind of professional to develop their own software, highly sophisticated software. It's not how it used to be a year ago, not even 6 months ago. Now, with vibe coding, essentially a chat with specific bots, with specific AI tools, and combining different ones, we can create software to do highly specialized work that before we weren't able to do that. Why? The paradigm of software development for the past decades has been programmers know how to code. People like us do whatever work we do. We try to explain the problems we have to them. Whatever they understand out of what we're doing, they convert it into code. Then they give us the code. We give them feedback. They try to go back. And this is back and forth essentially has created incomplete software in many ways. Or I would say over-engineered software. In what way? They give you something that can do 5,000 things and you use 10. That's my experience with a lot of the programs that we use, or 15 or 20. But the point is that right now, and this has been discussion in many of the AI conferences this past year, professionals can jump from the development point to a full professional suite on their own. To give you an example, by using Claude and then Lovable and Replit, these are the top two vibe coding tools in the market right now. We can create dashboards like this, essentially just to give you a little bit of an idea what you're looking at. This is a media and conflict insights platform that combines about 40 sources. And in the core of it is Claude that takes all the sources and the data and the keywords that we ingest, about 4 gigabytes a day, and give us a situational awareness for the UK in this specific case, briefing at any point of the day. So this software, just for you to be aware, it would have cost about 100 to 150,000 to develop with a software firm that's small boutique firm. Right now, the cost for this was about £1,000, but it's much less work that you would expect, but you need to have the right structure of following it so you don't create like a messy algorithm in the back end. But right now with Claude, if I was any kind of investigator, like for a criminal case, I would go on Claude, tell Claude what I'm doing. This is my role. I want to develop a platform that is an intelligence platform to monitor all the sources that are relevant to my case. And I will develop this on Lovable or Replit, whichever is your choice. Have Claude guide me through the first steps, create a master strategy document that I drop then on Lovable with my prompts one by one, because we break it into development phases so that Lovable doesn't get lost, because otherwise it does its own thing. We need to break it into development phases. So develop this in chunks at a time. Claude can do this for us. And in the end, what Lovable does is collects all the dots and give you both the front end, the design, and the back end. And you have in your phone or on your computer an automated assistant that collects all the information and it learns from what you need and what you actually expect for your case and flags it. That's why here what I have as a threat, and I'm wrapping up with this. This is a relevance essentially meter. Once highly specific to my case pops up, I get a notification. This was unimaginable 2 years ago, maybe even a year ago. But now we can collect data that are fragmented, that are relevant to our case, and have AI assistants like this to do a lot of the OSINT work that we need for us. And I think this is where the future is going. All of my work has been transitioning from the basic OSINT to creating OSINT streamlined software for highly complex cases. Thank you, and I'm stopping my screen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nikolas, for that presentation. I enjoyed it. I think it was so interesting learning about the fundamentals of OSINT and the importance of storytelling specifically. And I liked how you included all the different examples of applications of AI to the collection of open source intelligence in the presentation. So thank you very much for that. That was brilliant. We now move on to Professor Michael Tiu, who will be speaking about the application of OSINT to various cases going through the international courts. I'll be handing over to him now, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Let me just spotlight you.
Thank you very much, Adiba. And I'm going to take all the things that you've learned from Nikolas and put them within the framework of international criminal law, which is the focus of what I'm going to be talking about. In particular, the idea that the fundamentals involve data collection, logical reasoning, as well as storytelling, which are essentially what you do when you are presenting, investigating, and trying a case before the International Criminal Court or in international criminal law. I think more acutely in this field, because you're not talking about one or two incidents. You're talking about this very big story where even contextual factors are elements of the crimes themselves, including, for example, crimes against humanity. And of course, you've heard from the earlier presentation that you begin with data and that at some point you connect those and that becomes intelligence. And that this presentation, what I'm going to talk about, will advance that further for what we need when we are before a court like the International Criminal Court, which is evidence. How that intelligence becomes evidence and what steps might it go through before it becomes admissible or will be accepted to prove a particular point or not. Okay, so but I suppose we can go back to the idea that open source information and whether it becomes intelligence or evidence is not really new in the sense that we've always had open source information before digital evidence. For example, you have newspapers, news reports, public records that before the advent of the internet, which a lot of you are young people and would not have been exposed to primarily, but as a lawyer and as a millennial, I grew up in an age where we got certain information not through internet, and so we had to go to libraries, we had to go to government offices to get that information, and that's already open source, and that really goes to why, the question of why they're open source, or they could be categorized as open source because you are able to obtain that information through observation, right? Where you have access that is legal and access to everybody. And then you can also, even if it's, let's say, for a fee, you can purchase it, but there is no limitation as to who can purchase it, as opposed to some information or some services which might be available only even via purchase through a limited group of people. But this is open source, so anybody is able to access this, even if it is for a fee or for purchase. And then, of course, things that you're able to request from institutions like the government, whether freely or through Freedom of Information Acts, that where there's a mandate to provide you with certain information. So those are the methodologies. And you also have, as we mentioned earlier, typologies of what sources open source information and intelligence, eventually evidence, might be coming from. And that can mean geospatial intelligence from the GPS that you have, or when you have geotagging devices, when you upload, let's say, a photo on a social media platform, and it allows you to tag a particular location where you are or where that photo may have been taken. Of course, news media, and that can be traditional as well as social media. Academic work, papers by professors and think tanks, public reports by government offices or private entities. You have, of course, social media, and then you have your videos, photos, images, and other digital instruments, such as the audio, of course, you get from the internet and are digital in form. And why are they relevant? Well, they're relevant for the things that they're able to show and prove, but also in particular for cases and investigations because they're cost effective. And of course, we know that in the context of international criminal law, institutions have limited resources. And that's precisely why, let's say, the International Criminal Court prioritizes cases, because it does not have unlimited resources. And so the open source information helps in assuaging some of those concerns. They also are able to protect vulnerable witnesses, because traditionally you would get that evidence from, let's say, a witness who testifies or a witness who volunteers the information or the document or the video. But now you're able to hide them, you're able to shield them from whatever risks that might exist, because you can access the evidence yourself through this platform. Which leads us to the third point on accessibility. And this was particularly relevant in the Philippines, but also in Syria, for example, where the investigators could not go inside the country to get the evidence. And so because it was open source and was accessible from where they were able to get that evidence. Now, is there a framework? Of course, as usual with technology and the law could barely keep up with the technology and the advancement of that technology. But we have certain parameters, maybe guardrails, that allow us to use open source within the context of criminal trials, as in the ones that we have before the International Criminal Court. So I won't go through these. What I would emphasize from the Rome Statute, and I know that some of you are studying the field as well, is that they have flexible admissibility of evidence in the International Criminal Court or international criminal law in general. And what we mean by that, we don't have very strict exclusionary rules in the same way that some common law and even civil law constitutional systems would have, where if the collection of the evidence is illegal, then of course the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine will apply. What we do have are courts assessing all those factors together: admissibility, reliability, as well as probative value. In particular, there are regulations that the Office of the Prosecutor, for example, of the ICC follows when they use and evaluate open source information that could lead to that information becoming intelligence that's actionable, meaning that they can make decisions based on that evidence, on that intelligence rather, and then becomes evidence that they can then present and is admissible in court to prove a particular fact or a particular element of a crime that is being tried. All right. So what are some of the outlines for this legal framework? We have particular cases and pronouncements by chambers of the International Criminal Court. For example, in the prosecutor versus Bemba case, where, and there are multiple incidents in this case, some of them pertain to the offenses against the administration of justice. We also have cases on interlocutory orders, as well as the main case, the trial. But the main point to be made is that there was an observation in this case that the prosecutor over-relied on open source information or intelligence as direct evidence instead of it being supplementary or corroborative to another evidence or piece of evidence that directly shows the fact that they want to prove. And this has been criticized and clarified by the judges there, so that the information, in particular, they called it lead information, in other words, actionable intelligence, as mainly to be used as corroborative and supporting other direct evidence. There, of course, we also discussed open source evidence as could be in the form of NGO reports, and the court or the chamber here made a statement about that there should be, that they are of course admissible and are useful, provided that they have sufficient guarantees of impartiality. Of course, because we know that the source of a particular information will often have agenda and interests, and so that matters to the court, and that should be part of the evaluation of the Office of the Prosecutor. In the case of Barushimana, here the chamber, this was a pronouncement based on the objection of the defense on the use of a Human Rights Watch. Of course, we know it's an international non-governmental organization that does human rights investigation and reporting. The use of that report was, according to the court, allowed. But of course, the question is whether probative value, how much weight is to be given to that report. And we'll get to that later. So another guide that one may look to when presenting evidence. In the case of Bago, which was, I think, one of the more consequential cases on the use of open source intelligence, this really related as well to NGO reports and media reports, press articles, which are also open source. They are useful, according to the court, in trying to show the historical context, which we know matters a lot, especially in armed conflict, in war crimes, for example, and even in crimes against humanity. But again, they cannot be substitute for the type of direct evidence that should be presented to prove facts and the elements of the offense. So that's a very broad outline of what is available in terms of the legal framework. The more recent cases show us that there is closer engagement with open source evidence that become more consequential in the findings of the court. In the Ahmadi case, for example, this was the destruction of cultural properties in Mali and Timbuktu. Satellite images, photographs or videos and other materials in the internet were used. And this was used to map out where those cultural properties were and what the activities were of Ahmadi and the group in relation to the destruction and the timeline. So this was a very useful piece of evidence in that interactive website. In the case of Al Hassan as well, OSINT was used. So the primary direct evidence in the Al Hassan case were still witnesses. But OSINT in particular, press articles or media reporting was used to corroborate the testimony of a witness. So as to the injury that a particular person had suffered because of what was committed by Al Hassan and his acolytes, as well as certain sexual or gender violence related offenses or gender related offenses or violence that had been committed by Alasan and the group as well. This particular OSINT corroborated the witness testimony. In the Al-Werfali case, the reverse was what happened. OSINT was the type of direct evidence that was used, and again, OSINT can be both direct and circumstantial evidence, but here it was the witness testimony that corroborated the OSINT. This one in particular was consequential because it was the group itself of the suspect that had uploaded the videos of the physical harm that they committed to certain people. And so they uploaded the videos on Facebook. It was taken as evidence, and witness testimony was introduced to corroborate the videos as well. So they've been used in multiple ways, and even in different ways in the dialectic, but they've been very helpful in these cases. We know that, of course, the Rome Statute and the regulations that we looked at earlier does not specifically refer to OSINT because, of course, the type of intelligence that constitute or could comprise as or could be open source is already available even before digital media became salient. But we have those cases to guide us, and in the Berkeley Protocol, and I won't really dwell into this. I'll go to the Duterte case fairly quickly now. Will give us some framework. There's been a study, and these are the things that the Berkeley Protocol tell us about how to use OSINT and the methodologies that might be useful. Of course, provenance, the origin of the information and the intelligence will always be important because you have to test for authenticity, especially in the age of artificial intelligence and even before that, deep fakes, where in particular would be very critical to establish that they are not in a criminal trial. The credibility, of course, and the reliability, even if they're authentic, how reliable are they, as well as the how to corroborate them, and in particular, what risks might be existent for those who might corroborate them, like witnesses, for example. So some of these concerns, data protection, right to privacy, and contractual and IP issues are also considerations. But we'll skip that and we'll go to the Duterte case, right? So in the Duterte case, it really is a good illustration of how open source intelligence and had become open source evidence and how useful it was for this trial in various incidents of this case. As we know, this is still ongoing. Trial is about to start in November of this year, and they just confirmed the charges against Rodrigo Duterte, who was the former president of the Philippines, charged with the crime against humanity of murder. Much of the case was built around the speeches and public statements made by Mr. Duterte when he held press conferences, speeches in his official capacity, open access news reports, NGO reports, as well as government reports. This was all in the context of what they called the war on drugs in the Philippines, and how it became a government policy. In fact, it was his campaign promise to really pursue an aggressive, active dealing with the use of drugs in the Philippines, and in their term, neutralization of drug personalities that allowed for the proliferation of illegal drugs to happen. To the point about accessibility, the OSINT was in particular relevant here because, of course, at the time that the investigation happened, Duterte was still the president of the Philippines, and his government blocked access to ICC investigators, so did not grant any of their visas, for example. And another thing that was relevant is this was at the time of COVID, when not all borders were open. Of course, people could not travel because of the health risks. From the very start, the authorization of an investigation that was requested by the prosecutor, these sources were already used by them to build their case. And this was at the lowest threshold of evidence, which was reasonable basis to proceed with an investigation. Multiple news sources that contextualized how the word neutralized was really used as a code for killing, right? A particular set of groups, the civilian population that we're talking about here would be drug dependence and drug personality. So because we're talking about crimes against humanity. Philippine National Police memorandum circulars and operational documents were used to show that there was a policy, which is, again, another one of the contextual elements that we need to show for crimes against humanity. And of course, the reporting by the NGOs and the Philippines' own Commission on Human Rights showed the scale of what happened and the number of deaths. Of course, the government contests this. The government had their own reports, which admits that there were deaths, but not as much as, let's say, the NGOs had reported. In the request for the warrants of arrest, the same statements by the president about supporting the killing, the neutralization by police officers of drug dependence and drug personalities were used. He released certain watch lists that eventually a large number of the people in those drug watch lists were killed outside the legal system. So they were extrajudicial killings. And these really all formed part of the case of crimes against humanity of murder. Now, the defense also, while challenging the use of open source intelligence and open source evidence, used OSINT themselves to counter the case that was being made by the prosecution. Okay, in the confirmation of charges hearing, for example, the defense, of course, we know that the prosecution used news reports, speeches by the president, the former president, but the defense used the same speeches to show that if you read the speeches, you will see that there were certain qualifiers to the statements made by the president. Maybe they contextualize certain statements such as that they were made in jest as jokes, which show that they were really not meant to be or to be interpreted as government policy. As we know, policy does not need to be expressed in crimes against humanity. It will relate to how systematic the attack against the civilian population was, or certain statements in the speeches, for example, which are also open source because they can be obtained by the investigators freely online, meant that really qualified the encouragement to kill, for example, in the context of self-defense on the part of police officers, which was a major part of the defense of the police officers in trials, local trials in the Philippines. We know, going back to the flexible admissibility approach that the International Criminal Court has with respect to evidence, that OSINT proved to be critical because they were analyzed alongside primary evidence. Okay, they were used to deny the request for the interim release of Duterte. He said that there was no longer any risk for him to be released because he was no longer powerful, but social media activity by his supporters, statements by his families online and in interviews, which are again open source, were used to say, actually, you still have power in the country, and it is very well the case that there are risks that you could escape or that you will no longer return if you are released in the interim. And ultimately, in the decision on the confirmation of charges, all these, in the chamber said, NGO reports, academic statistics like the number of deaths, as well as media articles formed part. So this was a holistic assessment or holistic analysis of the situation. And the court was able to arrive at that conclusion that in addition to direct evidence like witness testimonies, documentary evidence, all the open source intelligence that eventually became open source evidence were also helpful in analyzing this entire framework. Okay, so I'm about to end just to point out that, of course, there are certain issues as well when you use open source evidence, safety and dignity of the witnesses. The reliability is always going to be an issue, not only with respect to authenticity, i.e. what's the origin of this, but is it reliable in the sense that was it altered? And of course, Nikolas was able to talk about earlier what to do, what technologies you can use, for example, to ensure that it is authentic and it's not spliced, it's not altered, it's not forged, and you have certain things like hash value when you try to obtain recording and investigate that. So in the end, I'll end with a note that OSINT, of course, is going to be very helpful, but it's not going to be taken in isolation. As Nikolas said earlier, storytelling is important. In particular, in international crimes, the story is going to be very important because there's a lot of context going on. It's not, again, singular incidents that you're trying to prove. You're trying to prove conflict, the context of a systematic attack on a civilian population. And so you need to marshal OSINT together with your direct evidence. The approach of the court has been that it's still going to be direct evidence that is material, but OSINT can be direct, but also can be corroborative so that you're able to show the entire picture of both the contextual elements that you're trying to show, and the specific elements of the particular crime that the case is involved. So I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Professor Michael. That was such an excellent and comprehensive outline of the legal framework of the kind of corroborative use of OSINT by the ICC. And I found it fascinating how you went through the critical relevance of OSINT to the Duterte case for both the prosecution and the defense, as well as the issues arising from it. So thank you, Professor Michael. Thank you, Mr. Nikolas. We are now going to move on to the Q&A session. So I'm going to invite anyone who has questions to raise their hand or to put them into the chat. So I can see that Maria has a hand up. If you'd like to unmute yourself, please do go ahead.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for your comprehensive presentations. I have two questions. My first question for Nikolas and second question for both of you, if you want to answer. So my first question is about the AI risks and survivor-centered ethical approaches. Because Nikolas, you've mentioned the innovative role of the AI in this OSINT work, but I was wondering, given the challenges of this use of AI, especially based on my experience when we use AI for translating data, including survivor testimony or open source evidence, how do you maintain a survivor-centered approach and manage these risks when using AI? And my second question is about training for legal professionals. Maybe you have specific training in mind, programs that you would recommend for lawyers who want to advance their practical knowledge and skills in this field. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. No, very, very good question, the first one. I think any kind of consideration that you have regarding security in general, right now it's so easy, more like, as I said, easier than ever, to create processes and tools that can be even offline, even air-gapped. You can essentially store the data in your own server if you want. You can, so before you can escape the cloud. That's what I wanted to say. Like, a lot of the tools that I create, what we do now, it's a very recent, the past 6 months actually, instead of storing our data on, there is a service called Supabase. Supabase is one of the services that create the back-end tables and all the back-end systems that feed into the systems that we develop. And we have been using through Supabase servers in different areas of the planet to store the data. However, for more sensitive projects, what we have been able to do, and actually, if I'm able to do it, you can do it. It's not AI can guide you through the process. You can go to Claude, start developing a good prompt with it and a long vibe coding discussion to say, okay, this data need to be protected. Help me figure out how I can create this tool in a way that is used only in a server that I have in my office, in my house, wherever you want to be, and create a full cybersecurity suite protecting that data and the connection from whatever access point you're using to the server. By the way, Lovable and Replit, they have their own cybersecurity services, meaning they're AI agents that go through all the code that was developed and find the code vulnerabilities, cybersecurity vulnerabilities. But the last thing I would say to that is also you can do the following. You can plug in your Lovable project or Replit project, all the code you created on your server, and then you can have another AI that you use the API, so it's not trained on the data that you're giving it, and go through your code and find vulnerabilities. And after you do all of that process, which again, AI, like Claude specifically, is very good. Fable right now is incredible, can guide you through the process of being able to store the data on your server, and you're not, and minimize any risk. Of course, at the end of the day, anything that's online, you access online, it's not air-gapped, because the final level, the ultimate level would be to create, and actually I know law firms do this, air-gapped systems, AI systems that are running large language models in computers that are air-gapped, they never go online, and the LLM runs on a very powerful computer, and the data remain in the computer. So that will be the ultimate level. About learning, honestly, and I will close with this. Right now, with AI, it's the generation. We are becoming the generations of self-learners. You can figure out on your own. You have a very powerful tool as long as you start engaging with it in a way that it can guide you gradually towards where you want to do, what you want to develop, and customize your own learning experience. That's it.
I'll say something about the second question, which is on the practical training that you need. I think technology is going to be very useful, and your training on technology and AI is going to be very useful in sifting through the open source information that you could use as evidence, particularly in today's world where volume is just too much. And also reliability will also need for you to engage with new technologies. But in terms of the fundamentals of investigation and case presentation, I don't think they change so much, in the sense that you will still need to select the type of information and evidence that you will present in the trial and before a court. You will still need to contend with questions of authenticity, reliability, which are basic questions on evidence that you engage with in any given case, and especially in criminal cases. Perhaps when you evaluate the type of information and training that you might want to undergo, will still be training that does not lose sight that one, the information, the open source information that you're going to present in a case is going to be challenged. There is, whether you're the prosecution or whether you're the defense, the other side is always going to level objections, challenges to the type of evidence that you will present, because there's something else that is at stake beyond just the presentation of information. You're trying to determine, let's say, the guilt of a particular person for the commission of a crime. The other thing that that one has to not lose sight of is that you are still going to present open source information, intelligence, and evidence before a panel of human judges. And so they will still ask the same questions that you will ask if this were a machine, which in many other contexts will be smarter and faster in the evaluation of the evidence. The judges, in looking at each piece of evidence, will still have questions about where they came from and whether ordinary human experience will support the case or the story that you're telling, as Nikolas was saying earlier. So your story is going to be very important. And so in terms of the training that you undergo, apart from the technology that you need to be trained of and with, you also need your usual training on how to present a case before people you ought to convince in presenting those cases. And they all will factor in things like how did you collect the evidence, evaluate the evidence, and whether at all they prove the point that you're trying to make, which will be questions of probative value.
Thank you all. Is there any other question that anyone wants to ask? But if not, you are welcome to email the association's general email, so info@ayicl.com, if you have any other questions, and we can pass them on to Mr. Nikolas and Professor Michael. So we are now at the end of our event today. Thank you both very much, Professor Michael and Mr. Nikolas, for such a rich and thought-provoking discussion. And thank you to Maria, who joined us with her question tonight. But if there's one thing that tonight's panel discussion has made clear, it's that OSINT is no longer a peripheral tool in international criminal justice. And it seems that it's becoming increasingly central to how we investigate, corroborate, and ultimately prosecute the most serious crimes under international law. But that nonetheless, there are still challenges and issues associated with its use. I very much hope that tonight has given you, the audience, a stronger foundation and understanding of the use of OSINT in international criminal law. On behalf of the association, I want to thank our speakers once more for so generously sharing their time and expertise, and thank you all for being part of this discussion. We will be uploading the recording of this event to our YouTube channel, so I am sure that this will also continue to be a valuable resource for our audience not watching live. To all of you here, please do stay connected with AYICL. We'll be sharing more events and opportunities in the months ahead. And if you are interested in obtaining a certificate of participation, we'll be sending these out over the next few days. But if you are not yet a member, please do just go on our website, register, and we'd be most happy to provide you with the certificates. So thank you all once more and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.